Hey guys, welcome to Challenges Education. In our current affairs section, we have started daily news analysis of All India Radio from newsonair.com. I hope this will help accelerating your preparation for government exams. Here the show begins.
News analysis. Now we bring you a discussion on increase in oil production and its impact. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Arya Madan Mohan, journalist.
Mr. Bhattacharya, for some time prices have been rising and causing a lot of concern and trouble to us, especially in India, I guess, but across the world. What is your take initially in terms of the recent decision by OPEC? What is the background to that, and what impact is it going to have?
What has happened in the last couple of years is that the global oil production, which is largely controlled by the 14 member countries of Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, they had decided that they will control their production. The reason for that was crude oil prices internationally were declining almost on a secular trend. From around $110 a barrel in sometime in June 2014, they actually came down to almost $25 or $28 a barrel by around January 2016. Most of the OPEC countries, the main source of earning is oil. So they were naturally a little disturbed, and therefore they decided that this must come to an end and we must. So they cut production. What they decided was that they will cut production by 1 million barrels a day. Along with that came production disruption from Venezuela, Libya, and Angola. Now that came to around 1.8 million barrels a day more. So 2.8 million barrels a day production shortfall happened, and you saw what happened in the last 1.5 years, where prices have now already reached around $75 a barrel. Set it in context, 2.8 million barrels a day is only 2.8% of total global oil supplies, which means every day the world produces 100 million barrels, and out of that 2.8 million barrels was cut. OPEC decided was this situation cannot last for long because the market was overheating, and they wanted a situation where the oil market remains stable and become remunerative for a long-term and a sustainable basis. So aided by Russia, which is not a member country, they said that let us increase our oil output. So they decided that they will raise the oil output by around 600,000 barrels a day, but they will do it in phases. The problem was Iran, because Iran came under US sanctions. Iran was worried that if you increase production, prices will come down, and as it is, Iran will be hit by the US sanctions, so therefore it needed a benchmark. So unwritten understanding among the OPEC countries was, and Iran is the third largest producer, that oil prices will not be allowed to drop below $70 a barrel.
So this is a recent, sanctions were actually
sanctions
lifted
have
in
not,
2015.
But sanctions are going to be reimposed, and it is from November 1, the sanctions will be imposed, and it is not a UN sanctions, it is a US sanctions. There are ifs and buts in it. So once the Iran was assured by the OPEC members that we will not let the price go below $70 a barrel, broad agreement was reached that let us raise production by 600,000 barrels a day so that the global supply increases, prices remain under check, but they stay at a level which remains remunerative on a long-term basis without overheating the market. The problem has because Iran was not playing ball to this decision, so US has asked Saudi Arabia to increase the output unilaterally, whatever may be the final OPEC decision on this, which is why you are seeing this increase in the oil output, and the prices have remained by and large under control. But from the Indian perspective, it is still not very manageable, but it could have been better.
So that is about the international picture and the background to why prices are where they are at the moment. Do you feel that US oil shale, etc. production can be ramped up, or other sources can be found as well which can somehow mitigate prices in the intervening? Because after all, in November, a sizable amount of global production in terms of Iranian production is going to be removed from supply. What is your take on that?
I think the shale will definitely kick in. Whenever prices internationally have gone above $65 to $70 a barrel, shale becomes viable. Now, it is to be assumed that once international Brent crude has gone to almost $75 or $76 a barrel, I would imagine that the shale producers will find it worthwhile commercially to come back into the system. There's another thing that has happened, which is the U.S. is not coming into the global market to buy crude. It is using its own crude oil. Now, U.S. is among the three top consumers of oil, which is importing, was U.S., was Japan, and India. These countries, now U.S. decides not to come into the global market and use its own oil and ramps up its shale production. My sense is that even these factors will have a sobering impact on global crude oil prices.
So we can expect some moderation of prices going forward. What about the domestic situation now with, as we all know, the rupee has been falling lately, which probably exacerbates our pricing in terms of buying in USD. So what impact do you feel will the oil production increase have upon the domestic industry and domestic prices here in India?
There are many ways to measure this impact of oil and the changes in its prices on the Indian economy. Number one, oil prices were falling. Since that falling from $110 a barrel from 2014 middle to around $28 a barrel by January 2016. Now the Indian economy had a bonanza. Its tax revenues went up. The oil companies under recoveries came down. The government subsidy bill came down. The government's fiscal deficit was under check, largely because of these oil taxes. Now, what has happened in the last few months is that the crude oil prices have gone up from $28 to now $74 a barrel, and therefore the government is under pressure to reduce the taxes, but it is in a dilemma because if it reduces taxes, its fiscal consolidation plan would be under threat. So therefore, what has happened now is that the government is come back to the drawing board and see what is a more manageable level of crude oil price. The understanding as we see is that if the crude oil prices remain between $65 and $70 a barrel, probably the Indian government's mathematics on its fiscal consolidation program, its import plan will more or less be manageable. But the worry will remain on imports and the foreign exchange outgoing imports. Last year, the government spent around $109 billion on crude oil imports. 82% of our total requirement is met through imports. Now, there is no sign as yet to see that domestic production going up. As a matter of fact, for the last 6 years, every year, domestic crude oil production has been declining. It was 37 million tons 4 years ago. Today, it is 35 million tons. So, with no domestic production uptick there, imports will go up, crude oil prices going up. So, therefore, what you're going to see is your import bill will go up from $110 billion last year to probably $130 billion or $140 billion. So it will be pressure on India's current account deficit because after all, dollars have to be obtained. So the gap might widen unless the capital flows increase. So the real problem on the oil side is not so much in retail pricing as in its macroeconomic management. So one has to be very, very cautious and watchful of how the crude oil prices move.
As you said, production has been reducing in India. What is the reason for this? Is it just that less investment has been made? Most of the wells that are operating are old wells. I mean, what can be done to increase production in India? And I'm talking probably from a more longer term, medium to longer term perspective.
You have hit the nail on the head. As the saying goes that you must fix the roof when the sun shines. I think the oil prices are low, and I don't think the Indian oil companies, particularly the ONGC, did not invest enough in terms of going in for more discoveries or opening more drills or acquiring assets abroad. We did some drilling, we did find some discoveries, we did acquire some foreign assets, but clearly they were not enough. So lesson number one from what you are saying is this, that we should invest more by way of capital expenditure to create more assets, because the assets that we are now milking right now were created in the 1980s. So you need newer assets so that they will come only if you invest. Little bit of its assets have also been used to acquire HPCL. Now that was probably not a very advisable, mature move, because that money, 36,000 crore, if it had been used for maybe investing in some wells or maybe going for acquiring some assets which is producing oil, would have been better spent. But I think the lesson number 1 and lesson number 2 and lesson number 3 is invest more in creating domestic oil assets so that domestic production goes up and dependence on imports come down. After all, it is a question of energy security.
So do you see the requirement for foreign investment in oil production in India?
Of course, goes without saying, and I think the new oil exploration policy is there. A lot of relaxations have come in. These are all very welcome moves. You have the Petroleum and Natural Gas Ministry has come out with a new acreage policy where the investor which invests in a certain block can actually pick and choose its blocks. So open acreage policy, which means there is no need for having bids remaining open for a certain period of time, but anybody can come in. The country's hydrocarbons data is available and companies can come and inspect that data and take a considered decision to invest in those acreages without too many restrictions. And more importantly, what has happened is now that the production revenue sharing formula has been introduced. Unlike in the past where the revenue sharing formula was not the preferred option, there was a cost sharing formula wherein there were fears of gold plating. Now in the new policy, the revenue sharing formula is a much better system in which whatever you produce, a percentage of that revenue is shared with the government because the government owns the asset eventually. So I think these are all positive developments. The important thing is that there can be no compromise on energy security and there can be no delay in increasing investments in creating more oil assets.
So one point here, just linking in with the current oil situation and perhaps the generation of energy through other means, sustainable energy. So what will the impact of the government's overall plan to solarify India, solar energy, increase solar energy and other sustainable means, be on our use of oil? And if anything else is a mitigant, then please mention.
Use of solar, renewable energy is always to be encouraged. The government has increased its solar power generation in a big way. The target is to create around 88,000 megawatt of solar energy by 2022. We are already somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, around 20,000 megawatt right now. It has gone up hugely in the last 3-4 years. It's a big move forward, but I don't think we have reached anywhere where we can possibly replace and the need for oil in many areas of the economy. And after all, we are an economy which is growing at 7% plus rate. So therefore, our demand for oil will also continue to grow at a faster pace. So therefore, you need to invest more in oil. And one more point we need to be a little worried about, and to which I think the government has also been fairly attentive, which is creating oil reserves. The government has just about a couple of weeks ago decided to create 3 more oil reserves. Already we have got around 2 oil reserves in place, which is around 5 million tons of reserve. Now want to raise it to around 16 million tons of reserve, which will give us reserve of around 22 days of our annual requirement of oil. But then the global norm is you must have a 90 days of reserve. Now we are far below that level, but at least we have made the right move in the right direction.
I think it's about 40 days will be when we have completed our reserve preparation. Yes. So, Mr. Bhattacharya, just a point which is a slight tangent and not on, a lot of use of LNG now. We have about a minute left on this program. So just wondering, what will the impact be on increased LNG and how will that impact? Because a lot of the LNG is actually produced in India, I believe.
LNG, the issue is that you need to tie up the end-use arrangements, and I think we have not moved very fast on that, but LNG is definitely a good option, and I think we should move in that direction.
In the end, I would request you all to please subscribe to our channel if not done yet, so that you can get an instant notification for the videos we upload. God bless you all.